Hi, and welcome to Faith and Flour. I'm Robin. This week I baked 5 treats to stock our freezer and get a jump on the holidays. If you are looking for some recipe inspiration, I've got 5 that are guaranteed to please your family and friends. All of these freeze really well, and so I thought, why not enjoy some time in the kitchen baking while I have the time and make ahead some goodies to have on hand in our freezer. Some of these recipes are new and some are tried and true family favorites. I will be swapping out the all-purpose flour for a gluten-free blend for our son who has celiac disease. But if you don't need to do that, just use regular flour in all of the recipes, and I'll have those recipes linked down in the description box for you. The first thing I'm making today is extra chewy ginger spice cookies. But before we get started, I want to tell you about my bakeware from Caraway because I love using it, and their once a year event has just started where you can get up to 20% off site-wide using my link down in the description box. If you or someone on your Christmas list loves to cook or bake, now is a great time to get a great deal. I have been cooking and baking with Caraway for over a year and loving it. Every piece is made with 100% non-toxic ceramic, which is a great investment for your kitchen and your health. The cookware and bakeware sets come with organizers at no extra cost, and they come in beautiful colors that will complement any home. Check out Caraway using my link in the description box to take advantage of this once a year season of savings. For these extra chewy ginger spice cookies, I am going to be using this gluten-free blend from Namaste, but you can use regular all-purpose flour if you don't need to bake gluten-free. I love ginger cookies, and when I came across this recipe, I was really excited to give it a try because it has crystallized ginger, so I know it's going to have that really intense ginger flavor. I love using my kitchen scale whenever possible to measure my ingredients. This recipe gives all the measurements both in grams and standard measurements, which I love because I can put any bowl on my scale, zero it out, and weigh everything without having to use extra utensils, which will make an easier cleanup. In a food processor or a blender, process the crystallized ginger and the sugars until you get a sort of smooth paste. A few small pieces of crystallized ginger here or there are perfectly all right too. Transfer the crystallized ginger and sugar paste into a bowl and then add the melted and cooled butter. Just before creaming all of the ingredients with my stand mixer, I realized that I had left out the brown sugar. I should have put the brown sugar in the blender with the regular sugar and the ginger, and I think the paste would have turned out a little bit better, but this didn't seem to affect the recipe, and I'll remember for next time. Next, add the molasses, egg, and egg yolk and beat for another 2 to 3 minutes until it's very smooth and creamy. In a separate bowl, combine all of the dry ingredients. So the gluten-free flour or all-purpose flour, whichever you're using, some baking powder, baking soda, salt, and the spices. The spices called for in the recipe are ginger and cinnamon, so I added those. And then the 2 optional spices are cloves, which I didn't have, so I didn't add that to the recipe, and a pinch of ground nutmeg. And I added some fresh nutmeg, which I think always makes a huge difference. After that, add the dry ingredients to the wet ingredients, and I mixed everything together in my stand mixer. Our whole kitchen was starting to smell like ginger, which is the best scent. I wanted to lick the bowl, it smelled so good. And after I got it all mixed together, I covered it with some plastic wrap and then put it in the refrigerator for at least an hour before baking the cookies. While the cookie dough was chilling in the refrigerator, I started on the next one, which was pumpkin muffins with oats and chocolate streusel. This is a Pioneer Woman recipe, and those always turn out amazing. Again, I substituted the gluten-free Namaste flour blend for all-purpose flour, but the recipe's written for all-purpose flour, so use that if you prefer. And I really like these Enjoy Life mini chocolate chips, which I'm going to use in the streusel topping. They don't contain soy, which is another ingredient that we try to avoid for Peyton as much as possible. For the dry ingredients, I combined the flour, sugars, salt, baking soda, baking powder, cinnamon, and nutmeg. The recipe also calls for cloves, which I don't have, so I left that out, and it turned out great without, so you can add that if you like. I used a wire whisk to combine all of the dry ingredients really well, and then I made sort of a well in the center of this flour mixture and set it aside while I combine all of the wet ingredients. So that's 2 large eggs, 1 cup of canned pumpkin, and a half a cup of melted butter. Add the pumpkin mixture all at once to the flour mixture and then just stir until moistened. For the streusel topping, you'll need a half cup of flour, a half a cup of old-fashioned or rolled oats, a half a cup of light brown sugar, 3/4 teaspoons of salt, 3/4 teaspoons of baking powder, and then I just combined everything really well with a fork. Next, you'll need to work in 5 tablespoons of butter at room temperature, preferably. My butter was a little bit cold, so instead of using a fork as the recipe instructs, I used my pastry cutter. You'll need to cut in the butter until there are lots of pea-sized crumbs. Then fold in the mini chocolate chips. I used a large scoop to measure out the muffin batter, and I put it straight into my muffin pan because I know that they're not going to stick. If you don't have a non-stick muffin pan, you can use paper liners. smoothed out the tops of the muffins just a little bit so there'd be plenty of room for all of the streusel. Put some of the streusel topping over each of the muffins, and I did that very generously, and I found that I still had some of the streusel topping left over. So I actually bagged up the rest of it, and I'm going to put it in my freezer because, spoiler alert, these were amazing, and I can make the muffin recipe again, and I'll already have the streusel topping on hand. Bake the muffins at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 23 to 25 minutes. I'm having so much fun on this baking day, but boy do I have a mess to clean up. I actually made yogurt in my Instant Pot, so those dishes are in there too, but I will get to all of those while everything's baking, and in the meantime, I'm going to start getting the cookies ready to put in the oven. The instructions say to roll 1 to 2 tablespoons worth of the chilled dough into a ball and then roll it in granulated sugar and place it onto a lined baking sheet. And I switched that up a little bit. I decided just to use my cookie scoop and scoop them out onto my baking tray. I don't need parchment paper because I know they're not going to stick, and I don't really want to add the extra sugar, although I'm sure they come out really pretty that way. The cookies also need to bake at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'll put them in the oven along with the muffins and bake them for about 12 to 15 minutes. In the recipe notes, she suggests taking the cookies out of the oven about 8 minutes into baking and tapping the baking sheet on the counter in order to flatten the cookies a little bit and to give them those characteristic cracks and ripples. So I decided to give that a try, and I had really great results. I got really lucky with the timing, so the cookies and the muffins were ready almost at the exact same time, and they both look so good. The ginger cookies could not have turned out more perfect. They were beautiful. They were exactly the right amount of crispy around the edges and kind of chewy in the middle. And boy, they tasted amazing with an intense ginger flavor. I really scored with this muffin recipe. They didn't stick at all. They looked gorgeous and tasted even better. These muffins were so tender and moist, delicious, and the streusel topping added just the right amount of chocolatey sweetness with a hint of salt. Now for the cleanup, which is one of the things I love most about these non-stick baking pans. It's so easy. This next recipe is for flourless almond cake, and because I've never made this recipe before, I'm going to follow the instructions to line the bottom of my cake pan with some parchment paper. This recipe is so simple. It only has 5 ingredients: ground almonds, eggs, lemon zest, almond flakes, and sugar. And it's naturally gluten-free because you use almond flour instead of any sort of wheat flour. Start by separating the egg whites from the yolks, and then in a large mixing bowl, mix the egg yolks with the sugar, lemon zest, and ground almonds, and mix well until you get a thick batter. Because this recipe is also written both with grams and cups, I'm going to take advantage of that and use my kitchen scales to measure out all of the ingredients. I just find it so much easier than scooping ingredients and dirtying up utensils. I can just tear or zero out in between each ingredient and then measure out very precisely whatever I need. If this batter seems very thick and pasty, mine was like that too, and it turned out great, so just hang in there. I used my stand mixer to beat the egg whites until I had peaks, and then I folded the egg whites into the almond batter, and after that I put everything back in the stand mixer and beat it really well to get a smooth, thinner batter. And this is what the instructions say. Generally, you try not to deflate the egg whites by mixing them this way, but in this case I think it is necessary, and so I just followed the instructions. Just to be extra sure that my cake doesn't stick, I followed the instructions and buttered the pan and then added the parchment paper to the bottom. I really think I could skip this step, and maybe the next time I make it, I'll give that a try. Pour the batter in the pan, top with almonds, and then bake in a preheated oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. A few minutes into the baking time, I started to smell something burning. Oh no. I realized that I accidentally set my oven to broil instead of bake. So the buttons are right next to each other, and when you select bake, it defaults to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what I assumed I had selected. I'll be more careful about that in the future. Oh well, lesson learned. We don't like to waste anything, so we found that it was still good, minus the burnt top. And I made it again the next day to see how we would like it properly baked. So here is my second attempt. This looks so much better and it smells really good too. I just made a couple of changes since I was making a second one. And instead of the lemon zest, I put in just about a teaspoon of vanilla and a teaspoon of almond extract because I wanted it to have that almond flavor. So it smells really good. I can't wait to try it, but first I'm gonna let it cool for a little bit here, and I'm getting the rest of my ingredients ready to make 2 more recipes today. So this has been sitting here for about 10 minutes. The pan is cool to the touch, and I'm just going to gently flip this out. Works really well with the parchment paper on the bottom, and this nonstick pan is so good you probably don't even need it, but I didn't want to take a chance. And then I'm just gonna let this cool here a little bit, and I think this one's gonna be so much better than the one that I burnt, even though that one was really good too. So I'm gathering up all of my ingredients so this will go really quickly. I'm going to first show you my butterscotch brownies and then a cranberry cheese bread. I know that may sound a little strange, but I promise you it's delicious. So I've been doing things like zesting an orange, grating the cheese, and having some cranberries for this recipe, and we're gonna get started on that right now. So I'm gonna just keep having these cranberries. I know this seems a little bit tedious, but I think it comes out a lot better than if you were to just roughly chop these. And it's not too bad. It doesn't take too much time to come up with 2 cups worth of cranberries. And I guess I'm gonna go ahead and show you this cranberry cheese bread since we're talking about the cranberries. And I know it sounds very strange, the combination of cheese and cranberries and kind of a sweet bread, but I promise you it's really delicious, and the cheese gives it like sort of an unexpected but really delicious flavor. And I've been making this for years and years, and people always love it and ask for the recipe. So I hope you'll give it a try too. And I'm gonna show you all the details here in a minute as soon as I finish with these cranberries. So in here, I've got my flour, baking powder, salt, and sugar, and I'm just gonna sift these together using a wire whisk. And I am using a gluten-free flour blend. It's the Namaste Organic Perfect Flour Blend, and I used it in my other recipes recently, just cup for cup in place of regular all-purpose flour, and those recipes have been coming out so good. So I might have a new favorite gluten-free flour blend. But if you don't need to eat gluten-free, just use regular all-purpose flour in these recipes and they're gonna come out great. That's how I made them for years. Before adding the wet ingredients to this, I'm going to put in all the cranberries and the pecans. So that's 2 cups of cranberries that were halved and a half a cup of chopped pecans, and I just chopped them coarsely. Walnuts would be great in this too, but mixing them with the dry ingredients will keep them sort of suspended in the loaf pan as it's baking instead of just sinking to the bottom. So don't skip this step. I've done it without with varying results, but you definitely get the best results when you do this. So remember to toss everything together first. So now I'm gonna mix up my wet ingredients. I've got 1 cup of milk, 1 egg, the orange zest, try to get all of that out. Half a cup of melted butter, and it's pretty cold in here right now, so I melted this a little bit ago and it started to solidify again. But a cold day like this is really nice to be inside baking. And I'm just going to mix this thoroughly with my whisk. And then I'm just gonna alternate adding this to my dry ingredients with the cheddar cheese. And this is a sharp cheddar cheese that I grated myself. And I think a sharp cheddar cheese is exactly what you want for this. So pour a little of this in. We just kind of wanna stir until the ingredients are moistened. Add some of the cheese. Mixing sweet and savory is something that a lot of people think is really strange. And it probably depends on the culture where you grew up. And here in the United States, it's something that's becoming more and more popular. but this is a recipe that's just been around for ages. Let me know if you've ever tried this recipe before or one like it. This is something that I remember having when I was a little kid and loving, and then I discovered the recipe again once I had kids of my own, and I make it every year around this time of year or around Christmas time when the cranberries are fresh, and it's just so good. I hope that you'll give it a try. So this comes together super fast, and you don't need to really over mix it. You just want to make sure that everything's pretty well incorporated. And then I'm just gonna pour it right into my loaf pan. And this loaf pan is super nonstick, so I know I don't need to grease it, but if you don't have a nonstick pan, definitely make sure that you butter it really well before you pour the batter in. I'm gonna pop this in the oven at 350 degrees and bake it for about an hour. For the butterscotch brownies, I've got 3/4 cups of butter in here that I've melted. And I'm going to add 2 cups of brown sugar to that. Just gonna continue to cook this over medium-high heat until it comes to a boil. Then I'm gonna put it in my mixing bowl and let it cool for just a little bit while I prepare a couple of the other ingredients. So we'll let that cool for about 5 minutes, and that'll give me enough time to prep a couple other things. So I'm gonna measure out 1.5 cups of flour, and again, I'm gonna use this gluten-free Namaste perfect flour blend, and it's been so good in all of my recipes. But if you want to just use regular all-purpose flour because you don't need to bake gluten-free, then that works perfectly well too. Okay, so 1.5 cups of the gluten-free flour blend, and I just ordered a second bag because I'm loving this, and I think I'm gonna be using this for baking more and more and testing it out in more recipes. To this, I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. And 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And instead of sifting these ingredients together, I just like to use a wire whisk. It really does the same thing, and it's so much easier. So the next step is just to beat the eggs into this sugar and butter mixture one at a time and add the vanilla. Now all I have to do is stir in the dry ingredients, the pecans, and the coconut. This smells so good already. It smells like butterscotch. And the coconut and the pecans in here, just take it over the top. I could just eat this batter as is. It smells so good. So I just poured the batter right into my caraway square baking dish. I know it's not going to stick, but if you do have a pan that is not non-stick, then I would definitely grease and flour it first. So this is going in the oven at 350 degrees as well. So I'm gonna put it right alongside the cranberry cheese bread, and it only bakes for about 25 minutes. The cranberry orange cheese bread and the butterscotch brownies are in the oven, and I cleaned up all the dishes. So I am going to give this almond cake a try. Of course, it's very flat. Let's just give it a little taste. Oh yeah, this is really good. So much better than the other one. It's really moist, and I really like having the vanilla and the almond extract in place of the lemon. The lemon was really good too. So I think either one is great, but I'm really partial to the almond flavor. And this is delicious, so good. Now that it's all cooled, what I'm gonna do is cut it into small portions, wrap it in saran wrap, and then freeze it. And I love doing this because then I have individual portions that I can take out of the freezer. And this really helps me out too, because whenever we go to friends' homes or to parties and they don't have gluten-free options for Peyton, I can easily pull something out for him. And this will be delicious. My mom does this with desserts all the time, and it's a really great way to keep things on hand. Plastic wrap is optional, but I like doing this to ensure that the cake stays nice and moist. And it's especially good to do this with desserts that have, say, an icing or a filling. And it also makes it easy for Peyton to grab and go if he needs to take something along. Cranberry orange cheese bread just came out of the oven. It smells so good and looks amazing. I'm going to let this cool for a little bit, turn it out, and then give it a taste. This came out so well. The texture is perfect. I think it would be next to impossible to tell that it's gluten-free, and the taste is just like I remember. If I had space in my freezer, I would have doubled the recipe just so I could have a second loaf on hand. It's so good. The butterscotch brownies came out of the oven smelling so good. I can't wait for them to cool off a little bit so that I can give them a taste. The trick to cutting brownies of any type is to use a plastic knife. The brownies won't stick to the plastic the way they do with metal, so you'll get a much cleaner cut. These butterscotch brownies are always a hit at our house. The combined flavors of butterscotch, pecans, and coconut are perfect for fall and will be a delicious holiday treat to have on hand. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I hope you enjoyed baking with me today and that you'll have some fun in your kitchen, filling your freezer with treats for the holidays. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. We would love to have you join our amazing community of subscribers. And subscribing is absolutely free and easy. Just click on the subscribe icon below this video. I'll be back here next Sunday, so I'll see you then. And until then, have a wonderful week.